It seems as if they're not ready for me just yet. Let me say welcome once again, Dr. Fergus. I hope you're hearing me. Good evening to you, sir.
Yes, yes, we are hearing you, Brother Ruskin. We're hearing you quite well. And good evening to you. Good evening to your listeners on 91.1 FM Talk City. And of course, to all those viewing us and listening to us live on Facebook and YouTube, welcome back to Indaba. We apologize for last week's program when we were not able to be live with you last week because of a late technical problem that was unresolved before we could come on air. So, but we are here this evening with an exciting program, very controversial issues in some respects, but necessary to address. Very important issues to address this evening, and we have some very important guests. Some of them are veterans to the program, and of course, we have as well, I believe she was here once before. I'm subject to correction. The Queen of the Warao community. She's here with us this evening, Kasika Hortensia. She's here with us this evening. And you wouldn't be surprised to hear that she's going to talk to us about the rise and fall of the Columbus myth hero, having successfully taken down the Columbus statue on the 6th of August. So welcome, my brother. Welcome, my sister, Shabaka and Renee.
Greetings. It's great to be here. Hi, Renee.
Hi, good night, Dr. Fergus. Good night, Shabaka. I'm happy to be back with you all for the second season of 2025.
Okay, so I think we should we have such an exciting program for our listeners tonight, as we're going to deal with the topic of the day. The U.S. military assets in the region, the alleged shooting down of a boat filled with Venezuelan drug smugglers, which the U.S. has now deemed to be terrorists. And, we have, we're going to comment on the recent statements coming out of our own Prime Minister's office. And, of course, the recent press conference from the president of Venezuela. So lots to talk about. And, of course, we have a great panel to do just that in Dr. ChenziRa and Brother David Abdullah. So we're looking forward to that. But before we go there, ladies and gentlemen, let's introduce the queen or the cacica of the Warao community of Trinidad and Tobago, Hortensia Benjamin, daughter of Donna Bermudez Bovell, to talk to us a little bit about the significance of the fall of Christopher Columbus here in Trinidad and Tobago and more generally across the Americas. Hi, Hortensia, how are you?
I am good, and you? Pleasant good night to everyone.
Yes, so I suppose we understand that there were some technical difficulties and your mom couldn't join us tonight. Your mom, famous, of course, on TV6 for putting her fingers in the hands of the former Mayor Martinez and letting him know that if that monument was not moved peacefully, the Warao community was prepared to act on it. And of course, that threat from your mother really catalyzed the movement, and we are here today because in no small part because of the contributions that she made. And so, I know you've been in touch with her, you've been talking to her and so on. How is she feeling about these historic developments?
Well, first, let me say she went off with with all the excitement. It's like, yes, finally, we've been heard. Our voices matter. She constantly expressed that all the work was not in vain, all the negatives, all that wasn't taken in vain. It was a learning process for us. It was to strengthen us and prepare ourselves for what is yet to come, because this is just the beginning. That was the tests and trials of we could get our feet in, our voices could be indigenous voices could be heard, which is very important. And everyone is overwhelmed. Everyone is over. All the elders. Um, I just need to share this. When I had called one of our elders, that would be Elder Lynn, I said, Auntie, I need to let you know, the monument came down 2 o'clock this morning. She's like, oh my gosh, my ancestors. She started praising and she started going. She's like, you know what's the funny thing? This morning I woke up and I made cassava bread for my granddaughter, the original way to make cassava bread, flat ones. And she was expressing to her and teaching her how, but this is our indigenous food and stuff. And she's like, to hear this type of news this morning, it was only a sign. It has to be a sign. So everyone is just filled with joy. Yeah.
Indeed, and of course, for the benefit of our listeners, when we talk about the fall of Columbus, we are talking about the overthrow of the idea of discovery, which is a lens through which the imperialists taught us to view the past, in which the expansion of their empires into our region and all the inherent crimes involved in that, the genocide, the enslavement, etc. All of that, was something that we should be grateful for, because the people, the protagonists of these crimes, so they rationalize the expansion of empire and the crimes, and they posit that the protagonists of these great crimes were heroes and bringers of light and civilization and God, and so they were worthy of celebration. And of course, Columbus was at the epicenter of that. He was the ultimate symbol of that worldview, that imperialist narrative of the past. He was a metaphor for all those imperialist narratives. And so to remove Columbus was really to overthrow discovery. So tell me, from the indigenous point of view, what were some of the things that you all associated with Columbus that you felt it was important that we overthrow discovery?
Most of all, it would be our practices and our beliefs.
Yes, the way they were framed.
Yeah, the way we were framed. The fact that I could actually speak English better than my native tongue is something very heartbreaking. It is so much. It's so much, but it is such a great thing right now where we are not in the shadows of that anymore. Because every time you hear Christopher Columbus, you hear that they always tell the indigenous story and their lives and our ways through that name.
Yes, of course. And of course, that came with the notion that you guys were, cannibals, that your belief system was somehow inferior to everybody else's, primitive, savage even. Yeah.
And something that we already see that a lot of people are saying, so you all needed to remove a statue in order for that to be told. Yes, we needed that to happen. we did, because it's like always having one person telling you this is how to do it, this is how to do it, this is how to do it, and for a fact, you naturally feel it within your soul that this is not right. This is not how things were done. There has to be something better. Now, the fact that you constantly want to hold on to an image, an individual who actually never set foot on the land and claim to be a hero, tells me where you want to be, where you want to believe, and not actually acknowledge what was already there.
So possibly this is an opportunity for us now to begin to embrace our indigenous ancestors as a country. Most people don't know Baukanar. There's some familiarity with Hayarima, but Guaguanare, Baukanar, and others have been erased from history. And of course, when indigenous children go to school today, they're still taught about Arawaks and Caribs, and the facts of the 5 or so indigenous groups in Trinidad are not taught. I mean, that's got to be a disturbing thing for your kids. I mean, to go to school and not learn about the Warao or the Gao or any of the actual groups that live there.
Yeah. Well, even with that now, my kids actually give their teachers a challenge, especially the little one. Especially the little one, when they start to speak about the indigenous people, they start to refer us as Amerindians. So then she will say, sir, no, could I correct you, please? Not to be rude, but in our country, we don't say Amerindians, we say indigenous. And she will go on to explain why. And then she's like, it's not only 2 tribes, it's not even Arawak and Caribs. And she will go down the line of explaining the names. There's Napoyos and where they are from, and there are Warras. Do you know Warras were occupied in Saparia? I could show you where. And she is excited to express that. Now, their teachers want to reach out to me and say, but Alexia is telling me this, she's telling me that. Where do you all get this information? Well, our ancestors lived this part. My grandparents, my great-grandparents spoke about it. There are even members who are still alive who could tell you stories about the transition to the old to the new. And this is so important that if we could even get another foot within the educational categories, where they invite the elders within the communities to share these experiences within schools, it's going to uplift us in even a better way.
Tancia, one of the things that always, as for many years now has struck me is the fact that, you have teachers coming into class who've never interacted with an indigenous person in their lives in the capacity of an indigenous person. They're teaching this subject from these antiquated textbooks through the lens of discovery. And at no point it occurs to them that they could just pick up the telephone and call the Nepoyo community up the road in Arima or call the Warao down south and just ask a question about the rubbish that they're teaching the children. I remember as a child, one of the things that moved me was an elder had come in from Dominica. He was speaking at that place, one of the places in the east, a lecture hall in the east. And my mother took me to see this presentation. And during his presentation, the man just started to cry when he got to the point where he said, imagine, in the 21st century, my children coming home to me in the afternoon and asking me, Dad, did you guys eat people? Why did you all eat people? Why did you all eat your friends from down the road? And, and him and others knowing fully well that's not part of the reality of the Caribbean at all. There is zero evidence. Dr. Fergus is here. Let's bring him in on this subject. Doc, you were here at the University of the West Indies. Is there any evidence for cannibalism in the Caribbean?
According to linguistics, the answer is no, that in fact it was a fabrication of the early Spaniards for political reasons, because by condemning certain groups of indigenous people, particularly those who resisted and defended their sovereignty, those were the ones that they branded as cannibals. It was justification within Spanish law to capture them and enslave them. So that was the basic reason behind the whole thing. But I want to ask the Kasika something. Now, the Warao people being in the southernmost part of the country may actually have been the first in Trinidad to have encountered the Spaniards. It's believed that some of them actually attacked the crew of Columbus, but that's not what I want to talk about. The Columbus Monument was, as we know, a cause of division among the indigenous peoples in Trinidad. Without going into details of that division, could you tell us how the fall of Columbus has contributed to bringing the indigenous peoples closer together? What prospects are there, and what actual moves have already been made towards closer cooperation among the indigenous people, because I believe once you can speak with one voice, you're going to have much more effective responses from the government. So what move has been made among the various communities to come closer together now that that important cause of division has been removed?
Thank you for that. Let me tell you something. Before, I'm gonna try to be as transparent as possible, but still respectful. The indigenous community before actually were divided when it came to this. On the removal, some were like, no, but he holds a strong position within our history. There's no need to remove it. You're going to remove it and then do what? And all these lovely questions that felt like you're holding on to something that shouldn't even be. And not to toot my own horn, but I am a type of person that even though it is eating me, I have that control to stay calm and still listen to make sure I understand where everybody is coming from, which is important because I need to understand why would you want to hold on to it. There has to be a ground-rooted purpose of holding on to something when I know I want to go on. It could be landfill, right? After this monument has been removed, I have been able to connect with other indigenous communities to a point where they are ready to work together.
Great.
And it is all about respecting and understanding what everybody wants to do. But at the end of the day, whatever your point may be, we're going to take something out of that and going to take something out of what we are talking about and come to a common ground to make this work. Because it is the betterment for all indigenous community, not only in Trinidad and Tobago, because this is a worldwide movement. And there are other tribes outside of the country that supported this since it had begun with the petition.
Indeed,
right?
indeed.
Yeah,
Let me just add to that, sister, because I'm right in the middle of the discussions. The Tainos, for example, in Puerto Rico, you have a number of groups from Puerto Rico that are now hoping that Dr. Fergus and myself, and perhaps the Warao included, will help them to design a blueprint to move their society forward as well, because they have a number of Columbus monuments that need to be addressed. In DOMREP, they're also, the groups there, progressive groups, indigenous groups, are also looking to us to give guidance to them in terms of their movement forward. We know we're already in touch with people in the Bahamas, trying there to encourage the authorities to follow the model of Trinidad, to set up a task force to look into the monuments there. And of course, we know once a few intelligent people get around a table and they begin to discuss this issue dispassionately, they realize that Columbus represents something reprehensible and shouldn't be honored on a pedestal. And so we're confident that if they get to that point of having a task force, they're going to join us in the sun that we're experiencing right now in Trinidad and Tobago. So you're absolutely right when you say this is a phenomenon that is region wide, and of course beyond the region, right across the Americas and even in Spain.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was just going to say let's bring in Renee in the discussion. We have to wrap up around now. I was hoping Renee would have stayed on, but any closing remarks, Kasika?
Yes,
What next? What's the way forward for you?
I just want to say yes, that there are challenges. Yes, there are some people who do not want to come to an agreement, understanding on moving and doing things in the proper way, rules and protocols. But those who are ready to unite and those who are ready to get the work done and start speaking in our truth, living in our truth, and being able to have our voices out there, because it does matter. Everybody has come to terms and we are on the same page and ready to move forward.
Beautiful.
That's great. So we should have you again in future. And of course, the National Reparations Committee is planning a conference in October. We would hope to see you there. Renee, you stepping back again. Any final word to address the issue, Renee?
I just want to offer congratulations to the Indigenous community with respect to removal of the Columbus statue. That is such a monumental step forward. And I am extremely mindful of Shabaka would have spoken about it, about my own schooling, and literally being taught that the indigenous community in Trinidad and Tobago and much of the Caribbean had died out because of European colonization and that legacy and the consequences that comes with their presence. But as I got older, I started to work with the Emancipation Support Committee. I realized that the indigenous community is very much alive and thriving and growing here. And I think if it's one thing I would like persons to take away from today's show, is that the indigenous community is here in Trinidad and Tobago. They are observing and celebrating and very much living their culture and their heritage, and they are due a respect, because ultimately this is their land first. And we would have come here and we have the privilege and the opportunity to coexist with you all. So just congratulations.
Thank you, thank you. And I just want to extend a heartfelt thank you as well to Crossroads, Shabaka Kambon, and the Emancipation Committee, Dr. Fergus, and all their team members as well for joining forces with us, making this happen, especially to my elders and our senior Kasika, Donna Bermudez, for taking that bold move, that strength. Listen, this woman, she looked at the entire nation. She looked at every other community as her very own. And it was something that been disturbing so long. She actually stood and acted as a mother for the nation. You know, like when somebody children doesn't want to be listen anymore, and mom comes and put her foot down. That was her movement. That's how I saw it.
Yes,
And
and you know, we're gonna tell that story, Hortensia. We
yes,
are going to write
yes,
that history ourselves.
yes.
So we will
So I just
record
want to say thank
the
you
book.
again. Thank you so much. And we do look forward to moving forward in not only replacing something with Indigenous and everybody the communities, but in every other project that is going to uplift this nation and children's education. We look forward to work with you guys.
Beautiful, sister. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lots of love to you and mom.
Yes. So thank you for having me.
Okay, so that's the end of our first segment, and we are now going to introduce the second segment, our feature discussion this evening on the U.S. Armada that is threatening the blockade of Venezuela. Most people, or most rational people, see this as a blatant violation of international law, a violation of the United Nations Charter on the inviolability of sovereign nations. Of course, we know that the United States has invoked the Monroe Doctrine and the Roosevelt Corollary. Interestingly, the Monroe Doctrine really never propagated attacks on any regional governments. The original intention was to safeguard the region from European intervention, in particular recolonization and so on. So it's really the Roosevelt Corollary which bold-facedly stated that the United States had the right to invade and intervene in the affairs of any state in the hemisphere that did not align with United States interests. So this is what is happening here. So we're talking about the Roosevelt Corollary. We are talking about the principle of might is right as well. And the very latest event I was reading about was the bombing, unfortunate loss of 11 lives. I don't know. Shabaka talks about that. He didn't say they were allegedly described as drug traffickers, but I think we need to put in that clause as well. They were allegedly supposed to be allegedly described as drug traffickers, 11 people, and a particular gang was mentioned, but there was no reason for that identification. Now, one of the things we want to look at as well is the counter side of that, because while the United States is allegedly defending itself against the importation of drugs from the Caribbean, most of the drugs actually enter the United States from the Pacific, as David would know. And then the reverse side of that is the guns coming out of the United States in the Caribbean. The United States data itself indicated that close to 8,000 guns were exported from the United States into the Caribbean, guns recovered from crimes between 2018 and 2022. And 73% of those guns originated in the United States. Interestingly, they were legally purchased in the United States and end up illegally trafficked into the Caribbean, responsible for most of the crime. So it is not just a matter of the drug trade, it's a gun trade as well, and the gun trade. So the question could very well be, should we have the same right to stop American ships and search them as being suspected in gun trafficking in the Caribbean? Of course, that is where the might is right comes in. So we want to welcome our two guests this evening, no strangers to Indaba. On the left of the screen is Dr. ChenziRa Kahina, and she, of course, is a co-founder of PANC, or the House of Life. She's a member of the Pan-African Network, member of Caribbean Reparations Commission, the Society of Black Archaeologists. She is a professor at the University of the Virgin Islands College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences, among other things. And of course, Brother David Mohammed, a veteran in the trade union movement, a politician in his own right, and of course, an activist all his life. And he, of course, he has his own program, which we would advise our listeners to tune into on Tuesdays. He has his own program where he addresses some of the issues. In fact, the MSJ, which is his organization, has issued media releases addressing this issue. And perhaps we could start off with a summary of those press releases. So, Shabaka, do you have them in front of you?
Yes, I do. And I'll
hand over to you. I'll hand over to you, and you can introduce the issue through the reading of those.
Yeah, well, I think that David has put himself right at the vanguard of the progressive community, speaking on behalf of much wider community than just the MSJ. He said all the things that I think the entire progressive community has wanted to say throughout this period. And so I think what we can do is start from the present and go backwards over some of the issues. So the very first thing I think we can address today is this alleged, because there's some question marks over whether or not this bombing of this ship actually took place. And of course, there's also the question mark, David, of whether this was in fact a legal or illegal act on behalf of the United States of America to allege that people are carrying drugs. You see them on a boat in the Caribbean, and then to bomb that boat without any kind of due process. Is that a legal act? And then, of course, our Prime Minister's statement on the matter, in which she says that she's alleged to have said that the U.S. should kill all drug traffickers violently. So, David, let's start there. Let's address those issues.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Shabaka, and Dr. Claudius, and Dr. Thanks for having me. Yeah, this is a developing situation that Shabaka, you're right. We were very concerned about 2 weeks ago when it was first made public that this military presence was going to be in the Caribbean by the U.S. Military presence, and the nature of it, and what happened yesterday, or what is alleged to have happened, because, you know, I don't know if we could absolutely trust what the U.S. administration has put out. So there are questions about that. Was, for example, the Venezuelan Minister of Communications suggests that it was not an actual event, that it was this is an AI-generated set of images. Now, I don't know what the facts are. None of us know what the actual facts are. But the United States has not provided any other evidence other than this image of a vessel. And it wasn't a large vessel. It looked like maybe a 20-something foot pirogue with maybe a little larger than that, with 4 outboard engines and so on. You can't determine from that image whether there was, whether there were 5 people or 11 people on board. We have no information about where did it leave, what port did it leave. The U.S. claims that it had drugs on board, but because there was no seizure of the vessel and no arrest of people, and the old saying, dead men tell no tales, right? So there is no evidence to say that there were drugs on board. What was the quantity of the drugs? What type of drugs? How many people were on board? Had the vessel been stopped and searched and the persons arrested and so on, and whatever, assuming there were drugs on board, the drugs seized, then we could say without a shadow of the doubt that this is what took place. Because the U.S. Coast Guard all the time stops vessels in the Caribbean Sea, or in international waters. Our own Coast Guard does the same, and they report on what seizures were made, because there is ongoing collaboration between U.S. drug enforcement. In fact, the DA is very present in Trinidad and Tobago and right throughout the Caribbean, because there is collaboration. So the problem is that we just do not have any evidence. The only evidence we have are those images of a boat, and then you see what appears to be an explosion, and then nothing again.
Okay, so David, just to move the program along, I'm just going to say that there are also questions about the legality of such an act.
Yes, I want to address that now.
And
yes,
I want you to ask, I know that, but that question will evolve, that discussion will evolve over the next week, as legal experts all over the world chime in on that question. But before we even go there, let's go straight to our Prime Minister's comments. I want to hear how you feel about the Prime Minister.
Very, very, very disturbed. And the Commissioner of Police made a similar statement as well today. Very, very disturbed. For one thing, an act of war takes place in the context of 2 nations fighting war, right? Declared warfare. But this war on drugs is not about a war between 2 nations or even a major military organization like an ISIS fighting or an Al-Qaeda fighting against the forces of another state. So what has happened is military force was used allegedly to blow up an alleged group of people involved in alleged drug trafficking. And therefore, for the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago to say that all of them should be killed violently suggests that she has thrown out any notion of the rule of law, where persons are innocent until proven guilty and have a right to a legal process before the courts. And if they're guilty, then they have to do the time. I have no brief for any drug trafficker or human trafficker or trafficker in arms and other things like that. They should be prosecuted and pay the full penalty for their crimes. So I'm not defending anybody engaged in that activity, but we cannot say that anybody who's engaged in that should be violently killed, because
Now, David, this is not the first time that the MSJ has questioned, or been disappointed. In fact, on the 24th of August, your organization issued a press release where you described, you know, the statement, your response to the government statement coming from the Prime Minister herself was to describe that day as a day of shame and sadness. Tell us about those utterances that made you describe that day, the 24th of August, as a day of shame and sadness.
Yes, it was in direct response to the Prime Minister's statement that she would give permission to U.S. troops to use, and their military assets, to use Trinidad and Tobago's territory if Venezuela did anything to attack Guyana. She would allow U.S. troops to use Trinidad and Tobago as a staging point against Venezuela. And that was a shameful and sad day for Trinidad and Tobago, because our whole history of foreign policy has been one of recognition of the sovereignty of other states, and Dr. Claudius described it very well in his opening remarks, but also non-interference in the internal affairs of another country, and also taking positions even if those positions were contrary to U.S. foreign policy. So we, together with Barbados, Jamaica, Guyana, recognized Cuba in 72 or 73. We were the only countries in this hemisphere apart from Mexico to do so. That was against U.S. foreign policy. We are against the blockade of Cuba. That's against U.S. foreign policy. We are recognizing the state of Palestine. That is against U.S. foreign policy. We supported the liberation movements and the anti-apartheid struggles in Southern Africa. That was against U.S. foreign policy. So we have taken positions, even while having trade and economic relations with the United States, that ran counter to U.S. foreign policy. And we were not afraid to do so because we stood on principle. And the statement by the Prime Minister, through all of that history and tradition and standing on principle, out the door, and that is why it was sad and a shameful day for Trinidad.
Yeah, let me bring in Sister ChenziRa here. Dr. ChenziRa, you have been, you're sitting inside the Caribbean region. I'm sure you're in communication with brothers and sisters from across the region. How is this looking? What the position that Trinidad has taken with regard to this military buildup by the United States in the region? How do our utterances and actions appear, from within the progressive community across the Caribbean?
Well, first and foremost, I just need to say greetings and ask that the things that I share be clearly accepted, coming through the work with the grassroots and the more progressive forces in this region. It has no bearing on where I work in the daytime. So I just need to make sure I say that up front. There's a lot of concern because sitting in a colony of the United States and then moving through the region of our usually peaceful, usually tranquil Caribbean Isles nations, this is becoming like another Palestine in the making. It's making persons feel that there's going to be some serious type of warfare that's going to impact everyone. And here, as recent as these last few weeks, this whole effort of this migration and what appears to have the look of a interestingly similar invasion by U.S. Navy, Army, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, all types of military troops. This is being done on the intention of addressing Latin American narcotics and drug trafficking, etc. But it also is looking at minimizing any movement of persons from within the Caribbean region that are fleeing for a variety of reasons and are denied amnesty in spaces at this time. This is to address this increase in deportations and to make sure that persons feel completely under the gun of a very similar form of terrorism, under a very fascist, imperialist type of vibration. And I think it's important for people to know this is interfering with the zone of peace that the Caribbean has been able, by and large, to maintain for a very long period of time. So there's a lot of concern. I can say as recently as in our local media here, our own leadership in the Virgin Islands of the US has indicated a very similar position to support what is going on by the US for a variety of reasons, to ensure that there is a stronger force to stop the drug cartels, to stop the drug trafficking, which none of us have a problem with. But it's what that is doing. That may look what it is in the beginning.
Yeah, but let's address that issue, Dr. Chen.
Yeah.
Dr. Fergus already submitted that the vast majority of drugs do not pass through Venezuela. I think the Venezuelan authorities themselves have said it's no more than 5% passing through Venezuela, but everybody agrees that the vast majority, perhaps as much as 80%, 85%, passes through Ecuador. Ecuador being a friendly country right now to the United States of America, perhaps part of the coalition of the willing, and that's the country where the transshipment point through the Pacific to the United States of America, where the vast majority of the drugs go. Yet this thing seems to be all about the Republic of Venezuela. Now, going back to you, Brother David, you on the 21st of August, your organization said you categorically or totally rejected this pretext, the pretext of the war on drugs for the military build-up in the region.
Yeah, and the data that Dr. Fergus quoted, and which you refer to, is not Venezuelan data. That came out of the United Nations Drug and Crime Commission, which published their report I think it was in June of this year. So that's where the data comes from. And the US DA, their latest report, also published just a few months ago, makes no reference to Venezuela as being a major issue with respect to drugs going into the United States. And Venezuela does not grow cocaine. They don't process cocaine. And only 5% of the cocaine coming out of Colombia transits through Venezuela, of which about half is normally seized by the Venezuelan authorities themselves. So therefore, this issue of the ships in the Southern Caribbean outside Venezuelan waters, supposedly, is the drug trafficking is just not the issue. And the nature of those assets, several destroyers with guided missiles, amphibious landing crafts don't catch a speedboat with some drugs on it. Yes, 4,500 Marines. You don't need that to stop some small vessels and so on. Nuclear capability submarine. Those are offensive assets. By offensive, I'm not talking about things that offend us, but offensive in the military sense. In other words, not defensive. They're meant to take out targets in another country. They're meant to be able to soften up another country's military to enable an invasion or other kinds of incursions into another country. And that is why we said that this narcotics thing is a pretext. And the US has always tried to find an issue which is a lie, but which then creates the whole psychological environment that facilitates their real agenda, as what happened with the so-called weapons of mass destruction, which was a lie, of course, but which created the conditions for the invasion of Iraq and the destruction of that society.
Yeah,
I just need to make sure that I highlight one particular thing. I have to concur with what was just said, that the pretext of saying that it's related to a drug cartel or drug trafficking, that's the forefront. That's like the facade part, because the intention is to destabilize the Venezuelan government. And that's very clear, right? It's also to destabilize certain relationships within the Caribbean spaces. That's why we may have the PM in Trinidad and Tobago making such a strong statement on the pretext of, none of us want to support, none of us support drug trafficking. None of us want to see these cartels and all of the imbalances in the respective community. But at the same time, if you're going to do that, be consistent. right? Be consistent and pull on the countries and the nations and the entities inside of the US that are doing these things as well and are making trillions of dollars, right? They're not exposing that. So I think it's really, and it's very sad that we do not have the opportunity outside of the media that is pushing. You know, why would you even show a boat that hasn't really been properly vetted on whether or not it is a drug trafficking entity, and then just watch it explode and spread that all through the social media? I'm just saying that the trauma that this is increasing within the region and the uncertainty regarding what the US is doing, because they do have power, they do have might, and they have a military that very few other nations in the world will even come up against. So that's why we're starting to see very clearly that there has to be another agenda. And this agenda of just saying that it's to stop the drug cartels, that is not the primary agenda. There are other things that are in the making. And I'm seeing it sitting here in St. Croix, where they're getting ready to let many of these troops be deployed here so that they have easier access in this region. I need for persons to be aware of that. You do not have to believe me, just Google, because these reports are coming forward. And because of the relationship that the Virgin Islands of the US has with the US, there has to be if you give the forefront that, yes, this is about stopping drug cartels, of course, the leadership is going to support that. Of course, in an emotional fervor, there may be a comment, take out all of them. But at the end of the day, the real thrust of destabilizing these type of anti-imperialist relationships in the region, that's another part that persons tend not to want to talk about right now. So I just wanted to make sure I made that point.
Dr. Chen, our Prime Minister said that it was shocking to hear some persons using referrals to the Caribbean region as a zone of peace to push negative commentary on the US military deployment. She said the only persons who should be worried about the activity of the US military are those engaged in or enabling criminal activity. I think both you and David would think that that is, those statements are, a bit far-fetched.
Well, Shabaka, on that, I publicly on television and in other media, I actually said to her, call my name in public. Don't call it in Parliament, call my name. Because I've been talking about a zone of peace, and I've said that the US narrative is a false narrative, which the Prime Minister swallowed that narrative and is drinking Kool-Aid, somebody else's Kool-Aid. And I said, okay, call my name. Yes, challenged her openly to call my name. If she thinks that by my critiquing the government's position and critiquing the US position, and defending the Caribbean as a zone of peace, that I am somehow a proxy of people involved in criminal activity, call my name.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
I would like us to address the other issues involved. And Dr. Chen suggested it, that there is obviously a real reason that is so far not revealed, at least not publicly. The intimidation aspect of it, I think that's important. We have to question whether this intimidation is an incentive for the military or other anti-government forces in Venezuela to move against the government at this time, and to be confident that they would get some kind of support from US military that is not far from shore. There is the other element of deportees, because some countries have stood up against the reception of deportees. We know that African countries have been taken advantage of, having to receive deportees of citizens that are not even of the continent. So that program is intensifying, and of course deportees would be poured into the Caribbean as well, and this could be perhaps one way of scaring Caribbean governments from resisting the program of deportation. And there's the other one. One thing with Trump, he always speaks openly about his intention. And he did say that his interest in Venezuela is the oil. That oil Venezuela has the largest natural reserve of oil, and Venezuela has no right shutting down the oil industry now. And interestingly, there has been a move within the past few days to ease the oil sanctions against Venezuela in spite of the Armada, which was approaching Venezuela. So can we address those issues, which may be the real reason or perhaps other reasons behind the military aggression against Venezuela and against all Caribbean people by extension?
Yes, and just to add to what Dr. Fergus is saying, the question that he's asking, there just before this military buildup, there was a reward placed on the head of the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, and that reward was doubled, or it was doubled. There was already a reward or a bounty placed on his head for $25 million. That was doubled to $50 million, and he was declared both illegitimate as president and one of the greatest global narco traffickers, one of the greatest narco traffickers in the world. So are these things connected, David? I think that's where Dr. Fergus is heading with this. What's happening? Is this military buildup connected to other events?
Absolutely,
yes.
Because absolutely,
yeah.
the reports are showing that. That's what I thought I was saying, and maybe I'm not coming across clear, because the rhetoric that's being used, it's being designed so that persons will continue. And again, not to say that everything is perfect in Venezuela. The way that the United States has addressed and other nations have addressed Venezuela in particular, because they know that they are oil rich, right? And they are displacing the wealth inside of Venezuela, as well as the relationships that Venezuela has outside of its own country. And it has reached a point, I mean, it's legally, it's offensive. It's politically inaccurate. It has been the type of force that has continuously, they keep trying to justify some type of foreign intervention. This is not new. This is just something that we're seeing like now in social media, and they're making it, they're making it like even more visible.
Yeah, so Dr. Chen is alluding to a long tradition, perhaps going back to 2002, of U.S. attempts at regime change in Venezuela. Doctor, could you speak to Brother David? Could you speak to that?
Yeah, sure. And of course, you're referring to the coup d'etat that took place when Hugo Chavez was the president of Venezuela, which coup d'etat was really defeated by the masses of Venezuelan people coming out and insisting that President Chavez be freed. And the U.S. actually made a statement saying that there was now a new leadership in Venezuela. So they were part and parcel of that whole process. And there have been many other attempts at destabilization. There was a shutting down of the oil industry. In fact, during the shutting down of that oil industry in Venezuela, Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Manning was then prime minister, actually ensured that products, gasoline and other products, left Trinidad to go to Venezuela to make sure that Venezuela had supplies during that shutdown of the oil industry. And after that, there were huge change-outs in PDVSA, both in the unions and also at the level of management and technical people and so on. So this has been ongoing. And, you talk about the 50 million US, 25 million by Biden, then doubled by Trump, the 50 million on Maduro as a bounty, President Maduro. But the Prime Minister and there's no evidence has been presented as to why he is supposed to be this head honcho of a drug trafficking or narco trafficking gang and so on. No evidence has been presented. But evidence has been presented, a prima facie case has been made out before the International Criminal Court for Benjamin Netanyahu for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. And there's a warrant out for his arrest issued by the International Criminal Court, which International Criminal Court, we must never forget, was the result of the tireless advocacy and initiative of former Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, A.N.R. Robinson, who got the Treaty of Rome established and is a UN, therefore under the auspices of the UN. The International Court of Justice also has heard those charges of genocide by the State of Israel. So here you have international bodies under the UN determining one head of state or head of government is has to answer charges before an international court, and he's welcomed in open arms in the White House and addresses a joint session of the House of Representatives and the Senate, U.S. Congress, and receives many standing ovations. Now, that is not just hypocrisy and duplicity. That really is an indication of where the U.S., how it operates in its own self-interest. And that is why we ought not to drink Kool-Aid. Now, the question of oil, Dr. Fergus is right. Chevron had its license, OFAC license, halted earlier this year by Trump, and then it was renewed about 2 or 3 weeks ago. Because you see, the U.S. Gulf Coast refineries require they're designed to refine heavy oil, high sulfur content heavy oil, which is what we have off the Gulf Coast in the Gulf of Paria and on land in Trinidad. Of course, we don't produce much, but Venezuela, that is the primary type of oil they produce. So that Venezuelan oil has historically been refined, a lot of it, on the Gulf Coast or in the Gulf Coast refineries in the United States. And because U.S. shale oil production is falling and where the price of oil is at, they can't ramp up shale oil production very much more because on an economic, they require that heavy oil out of Venezuela. And Trump knows that. And that is why he allowed Chevron to get back a license. So oil is very much in the picture, as is the issue of the geopolitics between the US, which is losing its hegemonic position in the world, and that of the rise of China and of the BRICS countries. And just 2-3 days ago, there was this Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit where Prime Minister Modi was there and President Putin of Russia was there, 3 of the BRICS countries together with China, the president of Turkey was there. So you're seeing other centers of power emerging in the world. And coming back to Dr. Fergus, who always corrects me, that is not just the Monroe Doctrine, but the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine that says that the U.S., therefore, can do anything it wants in this hemisphere once they perceive it to be their national interest. And that is that we are part of that geopolitical conflict. And that is why we should not be taking the position of drinking Mr. Trump's Kool-Aid.
I just wish to highlight that this is a very serious form of hostility in the region. And as has been reported, even the respective leaders in CARICOM are requesting that any of the actions that the U.S. takes, that they're properly consulted to make sure that this doesn't spread out and impact the rest of the Caribbean. Right? That's the first thing I wanted to highlight. And secondly, very recently, even in the midst of a very positive expression of creative arts, technology, and much more, during CARIFESTA 15 in Barbados, there were several heads of various ministries from Venezuela in Barbados because they had a delegation that was there in that capacity as creative artists, but also speaking on these political affairs of restoring and maintaining some degree of peace in the region during this episode. I just think it's really important because sometimes we're overlooking the oil piece. Yes, we've already highlighted that. We're overlooking the relationship piece with some of our Caribbean region nations, sovereign as well, that have a different relationship with Venezuela, right? And then we're also looking at the other portion of what this conflict between Venezuela, Guyana over the same resource and wealth in the ground, in the earth, oil, and then that needs to be looked at when we're having this conversation, because this is affecting every one of us from the 48, the entire Western Hemisphere is impacted by what's going on in this particular space. So whatever leader wants to say, the drug cartel thing, fine. That we want to use that as a reason to get resources and do things. That's one thing. There's people in Venezuela that are struggling. The conditions of living are horrific, and we need to acknowledge that as well. So while we're speaking about these things, it's important to look at some of the communique that has been coming from Venezuela itself regarding this matter,
So what are you suggesting, Dr. Chen, with that statement there? We know that the Venezuelan economy has suffered greatly, in the past, particularly around the period of 2019, 2020, I think would have been a real nadir for them, based on the impact of U.S. sanctions in particular. But so what are you suggesting about the conditions on the ground in Venezuela and how that should impact the way we see the situation?
We need to be very honest and get to the brass tacks and learn a little bit more from the perspective of the people of Venezuela, and not just go with what the Western media is purporting in these different areas. I agree with the portion, the drug cartel piece. There's a lot of history to that on a number of sides. Venezuela is not the primary location. You all have already said that, and there's research and data that prove that. But I think that right now we need to navigate for the same conditions that are happening there are similar conditions that are happening in other parts of the world. And we're not looking at this as clearly as we should. So if we can find that manner in which, whether it's through CARICOM, whether it's through the Latin American respective economic commissions, whether it's through OECS, whichever entities that can actually restore some degree of negotiation, because just blowing people up out of the sea is not the solution. It's not.
Yeah, so I think I get your point there, Dr. Chen. Brother David, just to advance the conversation, I think I get Dr. Chen's point. The United States and Venezuela are our neighbors in the Caribbean, on the northern and southern end of the Caribbean Sea. And, in the middle, we see this place as a zone of peace. We don't want to see things that are happening that have happened historically in places like Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, or God forbid what's going on in Palestine. We don't want to see those images coming out of this part of the world. And so we are steadfastly trying to protect this space from that kind of activity. So we're really calling on our brothers and sisters in the United States of America to pull back as far as we can, use our influence, that we don't want. And that's why we're so disappointed, I suppose, with the utterances of our Prime Minister. As David said, it doesn't seem that that she's given adequate, consideration to these kinds of concerns based on the kinds of weaponry that have entered the region. But one of the things I want you to address on tonight's program is the utterances of the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, in his last press conference, which is now being discussed all over the world. He said that he remained open to dialogue with the United States of America. And he mentioned in his press conference 2 particular channels that he had left open, and he also suggested that the direction that the United States is heading in relation to Venezuela, comes from Marco Rubio and a particular group of people around him, going back to Elliot Abrams and John Bolton and so on, who seem to think that the approach to Venezuela is one of applying as much pressure as possible and potentially engaging in armed conflict. And he was hoping that that Donald Trump might look on this critically and decide not to go through with the worst case scenario here. David, what's your view on that?
Yeah, I think that's very important. I didn't actually hear that, so thanks, Shabaka, for bringing us up to date in terms of that last press conference by President Maduro. So I just want to make one quick comment in terms of what Dr. ChenziRa said about the conditions in Venezuela. And you're right, there was a very bad period between, I think, about 20 2017 to about 2021, 2022, when things were exceptionally difficult in Venezuela. And, you know, people I know living there who are senior members of the party said life was very difficult, you know, electricity, this, that, and the other. But we also have to know that the situation has recovered very, very significantly. And I was there in 2019 and the situation was difficult. I was there in January. Shabaka was there as well in January, I think, or late last year. And the situation is very different now in terms, you're seeing visibly, you know, food stuff, vegetables and fruit being sold on the side of the street by vendors and business activity, the malls and all of that. So the situation has recovered. There's significant economic growth in Venezuela. And one of the things I'm concerned about is whether that naval presence, if not to attack Venezuela militarily, is meant to create a naval blockade of Venezuela to prevent commercial vessels from going in or coming out of Venezuela, and therefore strengthening the sanctions that have already created great difficulty for Venezuela. So that is something that we may need to look at. But you're right in terms of Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio comes out of the Cuban American community out of Miami, and therefore has that political and ideological position that there must be regime change in Cuba, and any other country that has been supportive of Cuba, namely Nicaragua and Venezuela, there must be regime change there as well. So that we have to understand his politics. And he's not only Secretary of State, but he's also has the position of National Security Advisor. So he has two critical positions in the US administration that carry a hell of a lot of power, and therefore can be directing a lot of US foreign policy in this part of the world. And knowing what his positions have been historically, we can see the ramping up of US military presence in the region, because part of this may also be directed at Cuba. We must not let our gaze only be on Venezuela. It is not just Venezuela that Rubio has his eyes on in terms of change. It is also Cuba. Yes, so we have to take that into consideration as well.
Yeah, Doc, the President Maduro, after suggesting that he was open to dialogue, he said that if dialogue fails and the worst case scenario is implemented, then Venezuela is prepared. And he said that the history of Venezuela shows that they are champions of the world in rebellion. And he pointed to the mobilization of 8,200,000 strong volunteers in the militia. Have you spoken to anybody on the ground about that mobilization? Have you have you been able to get a sense of what's happening in Venezuela with regards to that?
Sorry, that was to me, Shabaka?
Yes, I was wondering if you were aware of President Maduro spoke about a mobilization of 8,200,000 volunteers at this point, and said that of course that was an open. It was still open, so people could still register. I just wondered if you had spoken to anybody on the ground to get a sense of what was happening, because that's a huge development.
Yeah, no, I haven't actually. But what some commentators have suggested is that the US aggression has actually strengthened President Maduro's political position, because Venezuelans have a strong sense of their sovereignty and of their identity as a nation. And therefore, that mobilization is an expression of the defense of the homeland, and not just a defense of President Maduro. It goes beyond that. And therefore, his position might very well be much stronger now as a result of the U.S. aggression, and so this is going to be a very interesting development as to how far is the U.S. really going to be prepared to go. Now, obviously, the U.S. militarily cannot be matched by Venezuela's military in terms of missiles and all of that kind of stuff. But if you're talking about troops landing and going into Venezuela, that is where you get into a different kind of warfare. And one does not want that. And you mentioned that is why we have been insisting that this region remain a zone of peace. We must insist on it remaining a zone of peace.
Yeah.
Because
Dr. Fergus, let me bring you in at this point.
Yeah, I want to address an issue that Dr. Chen touched on. I wanted to introduce it, but she has done so already, and that's CARICOM. But before I ask the question, David, perhaps we can also see a closing of the gap between Venezuela and Colombia. Colombia, and that would be an important development that the United States regime would not very much appreciate. The president of Colombia actually condemned the bombing, well, alleged bombing, as you said, it could be AI generated, but nonetheless, the global media, have taken to it. He addressed it as murder. He described it as murder. And I believe, just as we have seen, that the sanctions of the United States have been able to pull China, Russia, India, and even Pakistan. India and Pakistan and China have been, serious enemies for the past decade or so, with armed conflicts between them. And now they are meeting, rubbing shoulders, shaking hands, and so on, largely because they see the need to confront these sanctions, this American global hegemony together. So perhaps something like that could be happening in the region as well. But what I want to ask Dr. Chen is, where is CARICOM in all of this? I was, really considered that at the very beginning, we did not hear the current chair, at least I didn't hear, I must say that, I didn't hear the current chair of CARICOM speak immediately to the deployment of the warships. And by now, I would expect, an organization like CARICOM to have summoned an emergency meeting, just as you see in world affairs, where the Security Council of the UN would summon an emergency meeting to address certain issues. So why is it that CARICOM has not moved in that direction? I'm saying I'm subject to correction. I'm not aware that any action has been taken. So let us speak to that.
I want to just highlight that there have been a number of reports that there are high-level foreign ministers in CARICOM addressing what I was referencing earlier. But I want to just quote something specifically, right? So that way we can speak to at least what the Barbados Foreign Minister, Carrie Simmons, shared, right? What effectively we are trying to do is to work through the diplomatic channels of making sure that there are no surprises in practices, so that you get notification wherever it is feasible for actions that are going to have a foreseeable regional impact. And that equally, that we are able to review from time to time the nature of the dialogue which we are having, unquote. I'm just sharing what has already been put out in public commentary, public statements, public reports. So again, that's something that we need to look more specifically, whether it's placed on the CARICOM website, whether it's put out as an official communique, because some of this is coming out as recently as like last Friday, over the weekend, and then keeping in mind that this African Union CARICOM summit is happening this week as we're speaking. People are traveling and traversing to prepare for that, to then address these other affairs that are happening right in the region. So there's more for us to uncover, and there's more for us to be able to share in the immediate future. So there has been some address to ensure that the entire Caribbean region is involved, and that these heads of state are part of the process. America shouldn't be allowed to just come into the Caribbean backyard and do whatever they want, period. And I'm saying that from a space of just out of reason. Nobody could go inside of America and just do what they want. They don't. So yeah, this type of behavior, it's not doing the commentary of being humane. But then again, America has shown its true side. And I'm so glad the persons are seeing that connection between Venezuela, Colombia, Cuba, because that was the other thing that happened recently. The unity between Venezuela and Cuba has not been touched, and this is a way to touch that.
Shabaka, yeah, Shabaka, could you check the comments to see if we have any questions for the guest before we close off?
Let me leave a question on the floor. First of all, I want to ask everybody here, Dr. Fergus, you included, if everybody's aware of the latest development coming out of Venezuela now, which is from the defense minister. His name is Minister of Defense Padrino Lopez, Vladimir Padrino Lopez. He has suggested that his country has to be on alert because Venezuela and Trinidad may participate in creating false circumstances or false pretext under which war could be launched. And he was specifically pointing at an event that took place or was alleged to have taken place in the Orinoco, where Venezuelan troops were supposed to have fired on or attacked a Guyanese vessel, which he said never actually happened. And that could have been a pretext, a false pretext for the introduction of war. So Venezuela is suggesting that they're deeply concerned about the role that Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana could play at this point in the developing potential conflict. Comments, anyone?
Yeah, sure. I'm glad you raised that, Shabaka, because in the Trinidad and Tobago Prime Minister's very first statement, she said explicitly, this is when she made the statement about allowing U.S. troops into Trinidad and Tobago if Venezuela attacks Guyana. Now, nowhere in any of the U.S. statements, from the earliest to the present, has the issue of the Venezuela-Guyana border dispute been identified as a reason for the troops and the military naval assets being located off Venezuelan waters. Nowhere. So the first reference to the issue of the Guyana-Venezuela border dispute was made by the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. And it was very curious as to why was that raised. And therefore, in my mind, it could be a signal that a false flag operation was going to take place. And by explaining what a false flag operation is, exactly what you just described, that there'd be a report that there was some crossfire between allegedly Venezuelan military and Guyana military, or some incursion by Venezuelan military into the disputed Essequibo region, which I just want to repeat, we affirm is part of Guyana. And my Venezuelan friends disagree, but that's fine. So if something like that allegedly happened, then the pretext for the US going into Venezuela using Trinidad and Tobago as a staging point would have been created. And so that false flag arrangement or false flag incident is one of concern. And when I heard of the alleged report of something with Venezuelan troops trying to stop people in Essequibo from voting or some such thing like that on Monday, that got me worried, because I was wondering if that false flag was being raised, which will then say to Trinidad and Tobago, the US would say, okay, we need to come in and use your territory to attack Venezuela.
Yeah, Dr. Fergus, your take on this?
I think David has said enough. I wouldn't want to extend that.
Dr. Chen?
I think it's really important that we ensure that all of the players, all of the leaders, all of the grassroots, and the people in the region, the people in Venezuela, are at the center of whatever resolution, negotiation, or solution it's done in this region. Other than that, it'll be a war that will be reminiscent of something like Vietnam.
Yeah, well, let me share on this question. Let me just share one thing here as we wrap up the program. We're getting to the end now. There is a view among some who some luminaries on the Venezuela question that there is going to be no war. And this is a question of bullying and bluffing, to support certain strategic interests. And that, this is an extension of a long-term strategy of bullying to try to achieve certain aims, strategic aims in Venezuela, going back, as we say, to 2002, going to 2019, that period with the whole Juan Guaido fiasco, where, it was, you had a guy roaming around the world with very limited support in Venezuela, claiming to be president of Venezuela, acknowledged as such by the White House and other entities, other members of the coalition, and and coming right up to the present, where we do have a similar situation with, I think his name is Edmundo Gonzalez, and so this is just, according to some thinkers, a continuation of a project that has always failed, and that will once again end in failure. What say my colleagues before we close off on tonight's program?
Yeah, sure, Shabaka. And there was, of course, an attempted assassination of President Maduro when there was a military parade, I think, and there was an attempt of using drones to assassinate him and other leaders. And Colombian mercenaries were involved in that. And then there was a landing of a group of mercenaries, some Americans, some Colombians, some Venezuelans, and so on, which was also stopped by the Venezuelan authorities. So there has been that ongoing process of all kinds of attempts. So you're right, and this may be continuing. The issue of dialogue is important because, not only was the OFAC license restored for Chevron, but there have been many plane loads of Venezuelans who have been returned to Venezuela in collaboration between Venezuela and the U.S. Yes, so the U.S. said we're going to deport these people. Venezuela provides a plane, and they come back to Venezuela. And the persons who had been wrongfully, illegally deported to El Salvador were also returned to Venezuela. So there is an ongoing process of dialogue and open channels or backward channels of one kind or the other. So that must be encouraged. That process must be encouraged, and therefore the zone of peace must be encouraged. And lastly, I just want to say that I'm not sure what is happening with the translation of it into Spanish, Creole, and French, but the Assembly of Caribbean People issued a declaration at a press conference last Thursday, and at the end of it, we're supposed to have a link which will enable people to sign on in support of the call for respect of sovereignty and this region being a zone of peace and other important calls. And that would be one way of, once we popularize it, of getting many organizations and individuals to sign on through a common link. So whether you're in Haiti or DR or wherever, and as I mentioned DR, I was there in 1993, just after they put up that massive monument to Columbus. And when they turned the lights on at that monument, people in the working class communities all around lost electricity. Such was the nature of it, right? So I just remember that as we talked about Columbus falling. So that's my closing comment. And so we'll share that declaration hopefully by tomorrow or the next day and get as many people to sign on to it as possible, calling for this region to be a zone of peace, condemning any military intervention. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Strong. Dr. Chen, your closing remarks.
As I said earlier, it's very important that we get to the foundational core of what is the purpose of this intervention that's hiding behind the guise of drug trafficking, when in actuality it's destabilizing the region. So we have to do everything possible to ensure that the region remains as a zone of peace, that will not support the destabilization of any of the sovereign countries in this region, and that we remember that the basis for change is actually internal and the conditions are external. Therefore, we have to respect these sovereign nations, and America should be aware of the concerns that the wider Caribbean has on its presence with every element of its military in the region, which is not customary for
Indeed.
decades.
And before I let Dr. Fergus take it home, let me just say, Doc, our dear friend Vanessa Lillian Herbert is with us tonight, and she has sent her greetings to you and the rest of the guests on the program. That's the former host of Indaba on 91.1, one of the golden voices of radio for quite a long time, for decades, for a generation. So she sent her love, and of course we want to extend that love right back to Vanessa on tonight's show. Dr. Fergus, your closing remarks.
Shabaka, could I just
have
take
one
an advertisement? Sorry.
I just have one thing that
let me get Dr. Chen first. Quick, Dr. Chen.
Right, just very quickly, because this is coming from one of our brethren, Comrade Felipe Noguera. And I quote, in order to preserve the Caribbean as a zone of peace, the people will have to assert the sovereignty that neo-colonial governments have been relinquishing. I just needed to make sure that I shared what is coming from within the region by those that are also impacted by all of this.
Yes, and we want to send our thanks and our greetings to Brother Felipe Noguera tonight on Indaba, and Brother David.
Yeah, the issue of Palestine and what is happening in Gaza must not be forgotten. And there will be an important activity tomorrow evening at 6:15, I think it is, in St. Joseph, at the Educational Center next to the mosque in St. Joseph, Eastern Main Road, where the Palestinian ambassador to Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean will be the featured speaker. So want to invite everybody. Solidarity with Palestine is absolutely necessary now. So we should come out to that event tomorrow
6:15, and what's the location?
The mosque in St. Joseph. There's an educational center right next to the mosque in St. Joseph, Eastern Main Road, St. Joseph.
Thank you, David. Thanks for sharing that. And we will remind everybody at the end of the program. Dr. Fergus.
Yes, greetings to our dear sister Vanessa. Of course, we're so glad that she tuned in this evening. We are all concerned about the Caribbean being a zone of peace, but I'm also concerned about the potential for long-term division of CARICOM, as we would have seen that followed the invasion of Grenada. We took quite some time to recover from that, and the divide and rule strategy, of course, is an old-time strategy of Europe and America around the world. European imperialism is the main strategy to divide and dominate, and dividing CARICOM is a real possibility. So we have to guard against that. We have to be careful. The crack is already there. I'm not going into details, but the crack is already there. I think CARICOM needs to be preemptive and ensure that there is no further division within CARICOM, and that we confront the threat with one voice and not be divided as in 1983, because we know what happened after that, the suspicions, the animosity, and so on, towards certain elements within the Caribbean, and Trinidad was at the center of that. But
it seems that we Dr. Fergus has entered into, but I think what Dr. Fergus is referring to, David, and this is our actual last 30 seconds on tonight's program, is that the utterances from our own Prime Minister, which suggests that every Caribbean country can decide themselves.
With my device, yeah.
Yeah, and just quickly, Shabaka, you remember?
I have some connectivity issues with my device.
Yeah, Dr. Fergus, we understand. So last 30 seconds, guys, 20 seconds.
Yeah, in the first Trump administration, there was a division in CARICOM when he invited some CARICOM leaders to meet him in Florida.
You close up the program, Shabaka. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Fergus.
Thank you, Dr. Fergus.
You might be seeing me, but I'm not seeing anything.
Okay, we
Understood.
don't quite see you right now, but we're grateful for your
Thank you all, and see you again sometime soon, I'm sure.
yes.
Thank you very much.
Okay, but we can't go on any longer. We've come to the end. We just want to say that we acknowledge Dr. Fergus's concern there about CARICOM. That's a real concern. And of course, our leaders, some of the utterances from our leaders, give us cause for even further concern at this particular time. And we're going to encourage them and caution them from deepening that kind of attitude that has already emerged. And so we leave it there for tonight on Indaba. Of course, we will continue to cover this issue as it evolves because it is so important to us here all across the region. Thank you, Dr. ChenziRa. Thank you, Brother David Abdullah. Thank you to all those people who tuned in live on Facebook, on the YouTube channel, on 91.1 Talk City, and of course, special good night to our sister Vanessa Lillian Herbert for joining us on tonight's program. Good night, all the best. See you again next week, Wednesday, same time, same place for the next edition of Indaba, the place where knowledge grows, the place to find consensus.